He took neuropeptides, those supposed communicators, the brain chemistry that makes it all work. There's more of them in our gut than there is in our brain. Bruce Lipton, years ago, carried out a study that is still significant. He took glial cells removed from the tongue with a tongue depressor. He placed some in a petri dish in the lab. He took half of them 5 miles away. He stimulated those inside the petri glass with electric shock. Those 5 miles away responded as though they had received the shock. Mind is not a local event. Consciousness is not limited to the brain. Years ago, I conducted a study where we looked at what you might call auras. In science, we call them bioplasma. Kirlian photography developed in the Soviet Union showed us that there is this bioplasma, this discharge about the body. Mystics in all cultures have called them typically auras that surround people. Some people in some parts of the world today use effectively this bioplasma to diagnose conditions of the body before they manifest in the body. We've learned that indeed some theorists believe acupressure use effectively this bioplasma and acupuncture manipulate this energy system. And that's perhaps why they're as effective. But more to the point of our consciousness, my particular involvement here was to look at the effect of objects that had charge to them. Objects that had been used in crimes versus objects that were thought to be spiritual. Would there be any effect? If we did a pre and post test on this so-called bioplasma, will we be able to see a difference without you being aware that in the room you were in, close to you but behind a curtain, were objects that had been used in a violent crime versus objects like holy water? Okay? The answer was yes. You may ask yourself the next time you're walking down a dark street or going for your car in a dark parking lot and the hackles in your neck stand up and you feel like someone's following you or something's there and you hurry into the car, lock the doors, and drive away. Where that came from? Well, a part of you has probably sensed something, and you don't know where that sense has come from, but it may have indeed been an important sense. We're still trying to discover what the limits of the mind is or are, but one thing that we know is it's not a local event. Psi phenomena has shown us clearly something that's been called the 100th monkey syndrome. Ken Keyes published a book, and it was called the 100th monkey. Now, many scientists today say, you know, that's a marvelous story, but it's not true. I don't know if the story's true or not, but I'll make the point out of this story and then tie it to what we do know. Supposedly in this story, Japanese scientists are studying monkeys. So every day they fly over this island and they spread fruit. Squash, actually, excuse me, not fruit. The monkeys get the squash, and of course they come out of the trees so that they can observe their behavior. One day they see a monkey take the squash to the water and wash it. That's unusual behavior. The next day there are a lot of monkeys washing squash. The following day all the monkeys are washing the squash. They find this amazing. They get ready to report it. Around the world, monkeys are all washing squash before they can report it. Called the 100th monkey. Did it really happen? Key said yes. I've never been able to verify it. I don't know if it did or it didn't. This I do know. Rupert Sheldrake, one of the leading researchers in something we now call M-field, has shown clearly in his research, which has been replicated over and over and over again, that mind fields are created. He's a biologist by trade, so he initially titled all this the morphinogenic field. You know, you take a walnut or an acorn, and that acorn always grows into a oak tree. Why? Why doesn't it become a rhinoceros? Well, biologists call this a morphinogenic field. It's an information field. This information field cues, if you will, everything about a species so that it matures and develops as that species. Is it possible that the mind has its own field? What Sheldrake did was a very interesting experiment, again replicated many, many times. He dedicated a room to teaching Morse code. The first set of students that went through, in fact, all the students were tightly controlled for the same demographics in terms of age and general mental abilities, grades in school and things of that nature. They scored, as was expected, on the bell curve. That is, 70% of them received C's. Okay? The next group came in. They did better than the first. The next group even better. By the time he got to the fifth group, they were all getting A's. They all had learned Morse code in a more accelerated way. His notion was, we're holding within this one dedicated room a mind field. Everyone concentrating on learning Morse code strengthens the field and makes it easier for everyone else. It's a revolutionary idea. Met with a lot of resistance 20 years ago, meets with very little today. Psi researchers have shown the effect of consciousness on machines, literally on machines. Random number generators literally can be predisposed. Among some of the most exciting research to me is research that shows large groups of populations that meditate on peace and lower crime rates. Now, that's not fictional. When 10% of a population focuses on peace, crime rates plummet. Mind is not a local event. Consciousness, then, is much more than what we thought it is. We have scripted within us this I can't syndrome. I hope we've exposed enough of that for each of you to be able to see perhaps some limitation that you've self-imposed. And that limitation says, I can't do that for whatever reason. In order to change that limitation, we have to change the script in the mind. There's a lot of research that shows us changing our expectation changes the expectation of others. The Pygmalion factor is well demonstrated, and all educators should pay attention to this. We run a number of studies where we take children who are labeled learning impaired. We give them to a teacher and we tell them, this is a special gifted student, but he has behavioral disorders. Give him a little extra attention, keep him focused. At the end of the school year, you know what we have? We have an academic student. We have a gifted student. The teacher expected, and somehow that influenced the student, who had formerly been labeled handicapped. One of the studies I ran that was still to this day is very, very important to me, and those of you involved in healthcare, please listen up on this one. If you're a medical doctor today, you insure against an iatrogenic effect. What is that? Well, look, if somebody is under anesthesia and you say, I don't know about this fat old woman, whether, she is going to process that information. And if in your words, I don't know if she's going to recover or not, she's going to have difficulty recovering. That's so well documented that you must have an insurance policy in case you slip. Well, we know that. But what about when you're not under anesthetic influence? Have an oncology study. We're going to tell them, I'm sorry, you have to live, whatever the time is. But we're going to give them a program, and we're going to tell them, but use this program, because the mind has some real powers we still don't understand, and at the very least, it may make everything easier for you. We shipped out all the programs, each of the physicians participating, and obviously they went out over a protracted period. So there was about 1 year in just getting the programs to different patients and different physicians. And then there is waiting to see if it makes any difference. And then there is collecting the data. And in came the data. We had divided our questionnaire to the physicians, one of the follow-ups, into 4 categories. The patient believed that the mind had a role in wellness. The physician believed that the mind had a role in wellness. Both patient and physician believed that the mind had a role in wellness. The physician did not believe the mind had a role at all in wellness. The data showed this. Every single patient whose physician did not believe the mind had the role in wellness was dead 3 years later. Every single patient whose physician and themselves believed the mind had a role in wellness, every single one of them was in remission 3 years later. If you're in healthcare and you suggest to a patient they're dead and they have no hope, they die. But if that patient has hope and you empower it, they live. That should be a message to every person involved in healthcare. Hysterical illness is something we see a lot in the Western world. In an old school, a drum from World War II is found in the basement by a custodian. He's working on a furnace, tips it over, chemical runs out of it. He runs up. What could be in this drum? It's got to be chemicals. The word goes through the school. Everybody in the school shows symptoms of the illness. They all go to the hospital. Psychosomatic illness, the symptoms are real. The body is really sick, even if the mind has created it. What's in the drum? Water. Everybody's told it's water. They don't believe it. They're still getting sick. That's hysterical illness. Can the mind cause illness? There is absolutely no question about that. Can the mind punish you? We know that personality types fit health and wellness. If you're a hostile, aggressive kind of a person, that personality is more likely to have a cardiac disease than a personality that introverts, holds it in, and is endearingly sweet. They're more likely to have cancer. It's just a matter of numbers when I say more likely. Is that a coincidence? Is it possible that we choose disease? Listen, when I'm working with entertainers or athletes and they're afraid of performing, the singer never gets a sprained ankle, she gets a sore throat. The athlete never gets a sore throat, he gets a sprained ankle. Is that coincidence? If I don't feel worthy, am I going to accept or reject good that comes to me? We deserve the very best. And when we do our very best, it's okay to say, thank you. I deserve that. Just as much as it is to say, no, I'm just no good at, I'm sorry, I just never could, and to punish ourselves. Now, how many of you can just accept all the good that could be given you? That's an important part in understanding how the mind functions. The placebo effect is well documented. We used to think that 20% of the patients would respond to anything, the so-called sugar pill, in a favored way. Lots of recent studies show 45% will. It doesn't matter. The more authority I give to it, the more I withhold it. You have a waiting control group. And you tell the waiting control group, you're going to participate real soon. We just have you waiting until we finish with this group. And then you're going to get this secret, And you know what happens? The waiting control group improves while they're waiting. Just the hope that I'm going to get this special and it's working on this other group, just that knowledge causes them to improve. Novelty numinosum neurogenesis. Boy, that was a big term, wasn't it? Quick encapsulation. That's the technical term used for how the mind accesses the DNA. Let's run over a couple things now in summation of what I hope we have shared and learned at this point. A belief can be looked at as a noun or a verb. As a verb, there's a role of expectation that exists in our psychology. It may be the expectation about how we should be treated by others. It may be the expectation about what we deserve in life. It may be the expectation about how much responsibility we can displace by blaming, which none of us do now, right? We all forgive. We let go of the thread, right? All of that is fed by this fight, flight, anxiety, depression, fear, anger, get even mentality. And oh, please, when you go home, turn off some of your entertainment, turn off some of your news. We have a cultural ethic worldwide that is developing that essentially says it's okay to get even. It's never been okay to get even. Come on. No spiritual foundation in its core doctrine teaches it's okay to get even. Gandhi taught us there is an obligation to right action. He gave us a peaceful alternative. I don't disagree that there isn't an obligation to right action, but right action is not getting even. Getting even is exacting a price to what? Somehow make yourself feel better? You're not going to feel better. You're going to fill your system with chemicals like cortisol. Cortisol will shrink your brain size. When I was in school, I was taught the brain is the one organ in the body that cannot generate new cells. We know better today. The brain can generate new cells, and if properly stimulated, is like a muscle. Use it or lose it. If I tied one of your arms up, put it in a sling, and kept it there for a year, how strong do you think it would be when you took it out of that sling? If you tie your mind up, you know everything there is, you resist change. I have a VCR. I know how to record and I know how to play. I don't know what all that other stuff is, and I don't want to know. It's too complicated. If you're afraid of embracing change in your life, if you're afraid of new adventures that challenge the mind, look for brain shrinkage. A lot of our reality is based on our expectation. That expectation is based on our belief. That belief is based on our chicken yard learnings. And in that cycle, we find ourselves. It goes without speaking. Everyone here knows that stress attacks your immune system. I'm going to tell you this. When you're stressed, when you're angry, when you're inappropriately fearful, when you hold all this inside you, your body is filling with chemicals that tell the budget of your body, defend, and there's no growth. And what happens? Well, all these chemicals, they shut down the ANS, they shut down the immune, they shut down the endocrine system, and now you're sick. And you say, why? I eat the right foods, I exercise. This is why. You ask somebody when they're 20, do you want to live to be 100 years old? What do they say? Are you kidding? 100 years old? No, get out of here. 30's old. You know who wants to be 100 years old? Every person that's 99. Do you know that the cells of the body have been demonstrated to be capable of living and perfectly duplicating and replicating themselves for 144 years? How many of you here plan to be 144 years old? Good job, Doc. We all should have that timeline in our mind. Year 2000 comes. Everybody is going to talk about centenarians. Here's a television show. My wife says, come and see this. I don't watch much TV. Well, I sit down, and they're interviewing people that are 100 years old. And you know what? They don't look 100. I mean, they don't look at all like what I have in my mind as a 100-year-old person. They're quick, keen-minded. In my mind, I'm thinking, that guy can't be 100 years old. Gosh, he doesn't look much older than I am. We run studies on the centenarian population because it's a fast-growing population in America. We expect that what we're going to find, the secret to being 100 years old, clean living and self-denial. Don't smoke, don't drink, stay away from this food and that food, eat only prepared this way, do this, do that. You know what we found? You all know who George Burns is, the famous comedian. He's a caricature of what we found. You remember Georgie and Gracie? Big cigar, a couple of pretty girls on his arm, laughing and joking, fully engaged in life, not afraid of anything. That's what we found. We found two things: an absence of fear of living, hope, and a sense of connectedness, a purpose, a reason to be here, an engagement, beauty, and awe. That was the secret to living a long, healthy life. That's not at all what we wanted to tell everybody. Of course, you want to tell them, look, don't you dare do this, and don't you dare do this, and you should do this, and you should do that. Not that that's not good advice, but do it because it's good. Don't do it because you're afraid. And don't be afraid to adventure. Like Seligman's hopeless, helpless study. Boy, if there's a seminal study there, let me tell you about it. Seligman's study was conducted this way. He took dogs. He put the dogs in a kennel area. The mat underneath them had an electric grid. He'd make an announcement like Pavlov's ringing bell, and he'd shock the dog. The dog could get up off the mat, run over to the floor, lay down, and there'd be no shock. Carried out the experiment, sufficient number of repetitions, deliver the shock, make the announcement, the dog would run off the mat. What would happen if we didn't give the dog a place to get off the mat? Make the kennel smaller, deliver the announcement, pair the shock. Dog has nowhere to go. Jumps up, nowhere to go. Stop delivering shock, just make the announcement. Dog lays and quivers. Doesn't even try to move. What's happened to the dog's immune system? It's shut down. The dog has no hope. It's trapped. No escape. And every part of its physical system literally began to fail. The human mind, we haven't yet begun to tap its potential. But we know this. It is totally capable, through your belief choices, of punishing you, and hopelessness is a certain path to early death. The mind modulates the autonomic nervous system, the endocrine system, and the immune system. The mind does. it also plays a role in this latent DNA, this 90% of latent DNA and its manifestation. And that is an exciting find. Our memory and our expectation form the context for both healing and disease. Our memory is a timeline from the beginning to now. My expectation of where that timeline goes, what am I going to be like when I'm 100 years old? It's a habituator. It develops patterns, and we utilize those patterns over and over and over again. And those patterns, most of which are hidden from us, exist in our subconscious, and they're a part of defense mechanisms or strategies we developed as we matured in our maturation process to avoid conflict and to find acceptance. Changing those memories involves sometimes revivifying old memories. And we have discussed false memories, but revivifying is the process that I explained to you earlier, where in a dream I saw what happened and then knew. When we create a profile, a program, we don't put a lot of stuff on that program that says, if you don't do this, you'll die. That's negative, it's aversive. Okay, so maybe I'm going to get in trouble right this minute, but I'm going to say this. If you're going to have a smoking program, you don't put on that program, stop smoking or die. You just don't do that. First of all, most smokers are going to attempt to quit several times before they're ever successful. And what? When they restart, you want them, oh, I'm dead. You just don't do that. That's totally aversive. What we do when we create a program is take a profile of a person that's not a smoker. Somebody says to me, how do you create a success program? Well, that's real simple. You sit down with entrepreneurs who are at the best of their field. And you say to them, what goes through your mind when? Because what you want to do is create a positive script that is a profile of the person you want to be, not a profile of what you don't want to be. We create by choice. You may not think we do, but all of quantum mechanics, including the Nobel Prize-winning observation that essentially says, if I decide I want to look at an electron in a certain way, it will manifest as a particle. So if I make up my mind I want to see a particle, I'll find a particle. If I make up my mind I want to see a wave, I'll find a wave. I'll never find both, and I'll never find random. The principle of quantum mechanics that says we live in a holograph itself, David Bohm's holographic universe. And that this holograph participates in our consciousness. That principle of uncertainty, the quantum is as real in our body as it is in deep space, as it is in quarks and neutrinos. We literally create, according to physicists, our world. Mystics would say, as you sow, so you reap. If the mind up here expects negativity, probably sense something, and you don't know where that sense has come from, but it may have indeed been an important sense. We're still trying to discover what the limits of the mind is or are, but one thing that we know is it's not a local event. Psi phenomena has shown us clearly something that's been called the 100th monkey syndrome. Ken Keyes published a book, and it was called the 100th monkey. Now, many scientists today say, you know, that's a marvelous story, but it's not true. I don't know if the story's true or not, but I'll make the point out of this story and then tie it to what we do know. Supposedly in this story, Japanese scientists are studying monkeys. to them. Objects that had been used in crimes versus objects that were thought to be spiritual. Would there be any effect if we did a pre and post test on this so-called bioplasma? Will we be able to see a difference without you being aware that in the room you were in, close to you but behind a curtain, were objects that had been used in a violent crime versus objects like holy water? Okay? The answer was yes. You may ask yourself the next time you're walking down a dark street or going for your car in a dark parking lot and the hackles in your neck stand up and you feel like someone's following you or something's there, and you hurry into the car, lock the doors, and drive away. Where that came from? Well, a part of you is more of them in our gut than there is in our brain. Bruce Lipton, years ago, carried out a study that is still significant. He took glial cells removed from the tongue with a tongue depressor. He placed some in a petri dish in the lab. He took half of them 5 miles away. He stimulated those inside the petri glass with electric shock. Those 5 miles away responded as though they had received the shock. Mind is not a local event. Consciousness is not limited to the brain. Years ago, I conducted a study where we looked at what you might call auras. In science, we call them bioplasma. Kirlian photography developed in the Soviet Union showed us that there is this bioplasma, this discharge about the body. Mystics in all cultures have called them typically auras that surround people. Some people in some parts of the world today use effectively this bioplasma to diagnose conditions of the body before they manifest in the body. We've learned that indeed some theorists believe acupressure use effectively this bioplasma and acupuncture manipulate this energy system. And that's perhaps why they're as effective. But more to the point of our consciousness, my particular involvement here was to look at the effect of objects that had charge. He took neuropeptides, those supposed communicators, the brain chemistry that makes it all work. There's more